Welcome back to Behind the Front Lines, and in today's video we're going to be doing an update on what is going on near the Robertine area and across the rest of the front line, as we are seeing significant changes, and this could be the start of the end of the counter-offensive, in terms of we are going to be seeing in the next couple of weeks whether Ukraine will reach their goals, or at least some of their goals, or whether the counteroffensive will fail and the Ukrainians are not able to break through the majority of Russian defences. They are now taken Robertine as a grey zone, and once Robertine is captured, then the Ukrainians can really start to push southwards, as they will be beyond the minefields, or the major minefields, and they will have significant access to the main highway and road that leads straight to Tokmak. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, which do like and subscribe. And if we do start in the Robertine Orikhiv area, you can see the big carve out now of territory that the Ukrainians have taken back in the past few months. Now you can see the blue areas, that's what's been taken in the last 2 weeks, and again, it doesn't look like a significant amount has been taken, but these are extremely strategically important positions, and a lot of this has fallen in the last couple of days, as the Ukrainians have now started to push their most advanced and their best equipped troops to the front line, as this, as I said, this is the start of the end of the counter-offensive. Now you can see at the moment they control the northern third of Robertine, and the Russians control the bottom third. This is what the latest map shows, but of course the map is always a day or two out of date, and what I'm hearing is that Robertine is pretty much either under Ukrainian control or the bottom half is grey zone. Essentially, the Russians have retreated to Novoprokopivka, or perhaps to further the northern trench networks here, just to the south of Robertine. So it looks like Robertine is imminently going to be captured, and they have been fighting over Robertine for weeks now. Of course, they were fighting over the fields, the minefields to the north of Robertine. They've broken through the minefields, because remember, the Russians are not going to mine territory that they are driving through, that they are operating through. They may create paths, they may create minefields sporadically, but to the north of Robertine, it was essentially completely minefields. You can see how there were very minimal trench positions to the north of Robertine, and that was simply because there were no Russians positioned there, or very few Russians positioned there, or at least positioned there permanently, as it was minefields that the Ukrainians had to overcome. Ukrainians have overcome the minefields and now been fighting for these forward positions of the Russian troops, and have captured them all around Robertine and to the east of Robertine. And you can see towards Verbo they have reached the major first line of defence, and once they break through Robertine, it will be heading straight southwards towards the first line of defence. As you can see, very few forward positions here towards Novoprokopivka. There are positions to the west of Robertine that haven't been captured, but I'm hearing reports in the last couple of days that attacks have been increased towards Kopani. But remember, the Ukrainians don't need to take these necessarily. If they get a big enough gap here, this gap is about 10 kilometers wide. If they get a big enough gap here, then they could always flank these positions and make them untenable. We always have to remember that. So they do need to puncture a large enough gap, but that may not necessitate taking these trench networks. But as I said, once Robertine is captured, which could be in the next couple of days, then the Ukrainians have about a 10-kilometer stretch where they can throw everything at the first line of defence. If they do puncture the first line of defence, you can see that they are very close to Tokmak, and even though they still have some other lines of defences to break through, they will have artillery that is able to pound Tokmak and pound these positions. And also, we must remember that these defensive lines are only relevant and only important if they are manned. And by the time the Ukrainians, by the time the Ukrainians break through the first line of defense, it is unlikely the Russians will have enough troops to man these other lines of defense. and it would essentially make them a lot weaker and a lot easier to break through, even though they look more elaborate. So we have to remember that, even though these forward positions don't look anywhere near as difficult to overcome as these more elaborate trench networks, these positions are manned by more experienced Russians and in higher number, whereas these trench networks will not be manned by as experienced Russians and anywhere near as many, simply because so many would have been lost trying to defend these northern positions. And that's why the Ukrainians have been holding back their main thrust, essentially not wanting to waste them getting through these initial positions and want them to properly penetrate through these main lines of defence. And the rumours are that that is what they are now attempting in the next few days and the next few weeks, to penetrate through these trench lines. And there are already talks of Ukrainians attacking these trench networks here and are properly pushing through these fields and these forest lines, attempting to flank round Robertine whilst also attacking it from the north. As I said, there are also talks of attacking Kopani and maybe also attacking over here towards Pokrovka, attempting to get towards Polohy, or at least putting perhaps some stress on Verbove and Polohy, maybe trying to sever some of these lines of communication and supply roads, because if the Ukrainians do break through with Robertine, get towards the first line of defence, these forward positions to the east and the west will become untenable and they will not be able to be supplied. And of course the Russians probably will withdraw those troops to man the first line of defence. So we could see in the near future a huge area of land here carved out and captured by the Ukrainian troops, simply because not only they're fighting them and pushing them away, but the Russians may just simply have to withdraw as they need to man their main defences. So I do think there's going to be some huge moving parts here in the coming days and coming weeks. It's been reaching boiling point for a while, but I think we are about to tip over. We're about to see some big offensive actions by the Ukrainians, and we will find out whether this counteroffensive is going to be a success in reaching some of its goals, which is to break the first line of defence and get towards Tokmak, and potentially its more optimistic goals of getting down to Melitopol. What I do think is unlikely unless we see a complete collapse of Russian lines. If the Ukrainians reach Tokmak, these lines of defences here are redundant. They do not mean anything, simply because if the Ukrainians get into Tokmak, it will mean the Russians have very little troops available, as they will defend Tokmak and any major city around here that's got these rings. They will defend them with all they have. So if Tokmak gets captured, then I do not think it will be that much of a stretch to get towards Melitopol. But we have to remember that the Ukrainians will also be knackered, will also be low on troops, and we will just have to see what happens beyond that. Remember, we'll just need to get through the first line of defence before that happens, but that is becoming more and more possible and more likely. Now, if we go to other lines of advance, of course, Eurozhine was recently liberated in the last week or so, and there is still fierce fighting going on. Again, the deep state map is a little bit behind. I'll actually show you the ISW map in a minute, which is a little bit more ahead and alters a little bit. But here at Eurozhine, the fields out to the east, more of this has been captured by Ukraine, and it's looking likely now they're putting significant fire on the roads between Novodonetsk and Kermenchivk and towards Staromanivka. And of course, there is also reports of some flanking manoeuvres towards Savitne Bassiani. But we have to remember that there is a river, quite a decently large river, spanning perhaps up to 50 metres wide at points. So it's not easy to cross to its east. So it's unlikely that the Ukrainians will actually be able to flank this and capture Savitne Bassiani from the east without capturing all these fields and fields to the west as well. So I don't think we're going to be seeing a battle for Savitne Bassiani from the east. I think it's more likely they go straight towards Staromanivka and try and starve the Russian troops here. But of course, seeing what's going on in Robertine, seeing the troops they have put into Robertine, I do think that this is more of a carving attack to try and carve as much land back here as possible And if all goes well in Robertine, then I'm sure the Russians will withdraw troops from this region and from the rest of the front line here backwards towards Tokmak and towards these lines of defences further westwards, as this is more of an important objective. If they lose 20-30 kilometres towards Velika Novosilka, they've still got large land bridge, but if they used 20-30 kilometres towards Tokmak, then suddenly the Ukrainians are at Tokmak, very close to Melitopol and very close to cutting the land bridge off. So I'm pretty sure that the Russians would much rather defend in the Orikhiv-Tokmak direction than in the Velika Novosilka direction. So they're going to continue to put pressure here, keeping Russian troops there, but also if those Russian troops do try and reinforce the Robertine-Tokmak area, then they will try to make a breakthrough and run towards Mariupol as well. But no changes in Eurozhine today. Actually, if we just go back to Robertine, we'll be able to see the latest changes. Again, this was updated yesterday evening. It hasn't updated today so far, but you can see in the last 24 hours, those sections to the east of Robertine has been captured, along with the sections to the west of Robertine as well. Now, if we do move over to Bakhmut area, as there are some changes here, but nothing too significant. Still, it's a bit of a meat grind, especially between Andriivka and Klishivka, with Russians pouring troops in, trying to push the Ukrainians away, but pretty unsuccessfully at this stage. And in the last 24 hours, the Ukrainians have actually created more of a grey zone around Andriivka, and now pretty much the Russians control urban Kurdimivka and Andriivka, and all the fields to the west are pretty much grey zone now, and that's same for Klishivka. The Russians pretty much control anything on the train line eastwards, this line here, and everything further westwards is pretty much now under attack. But the Ukrainians aren't putting a major thrust in, as I do think the objective of recapturing Bakhmut is on the back foot at the moment. It's not a main objective, and they're not going to push significant troops into this region, as they don't want to take significant losses. They'd much rather hold the line and attack here in the future than try to attack here, lose troops, and potentially allow the Russians to counterattack. They're in very advantageous situation here, controlling the higher ground. They'd rather hold on to that for the time being and potentially attack in a few weeks or a few months' time. And of course, if the Russians do cease their counterattacks, do start to weaken in this area, then of course I'm sure they will take advantage of that. Elsewhere along the front line, we have not got any significant updates. Still, the Russians are attacking to the north of Kupiansk and taking some limited positions in these fields. Allegedly, they've now got to the east of Sinkivka here, towards some of these forest lines, but at the moment, nothing significant has fallen, and it's not falling particularly quickly, again indicating that it's more positional changes, and it's not like the Ukrainians are withdrawing significantly or the Russians are attacking. It is simply Ukrainians preserving their equipment and their troops, and they don't mind giving up some of these field positions. If you go over to the ISW, you can see firstly over towards Robertine, you can see larger carved area here, and you can see lots of grey zone around Robertine. They have actually pushed further northwards. The Ukrainians control only slightly further northwards. But remember, this is the ISW update from yesterday, and they, of course, only report on verified information, not on speculative stuff. They only report on it once they've got satellite imagery and stuff like that. So again, it means this is definitely happening. These are definitely Ukrainian positions, but it just means it's not always the most up-to-date, a few days lacking behind. But you can also see significant positions have been taken out towards the fields in the east, and grey zones have been extended, and you can see the main lines of defence now are coming under threat towards the south and the east of Robertine. You can also see towards the Eurozhine area, a bit more updated than the deep state map is in terms of the positions. As you can see, a lot more of these fields to the east of Eurozhine has been captured, again allowing assaults to begin on these 4 villages and towns towards the south of Eurozhine, potentially opening up more liberations in the near future. So you can see we are at breaking point towards Robertine. Forward positions of the Russian troops are now either lost or in the process of being lost. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the coming days and the coming weeks as the Ukrainians do put in all of their modern equipment, all their NATO equipment, and their main offensive brigades, and we'll have to see how far through these defensive lines they do get and whether they can reach Tokmak in the next couple of